Let's start off with a bang, shall we? Or maybe we should say a snap. Avengers Infinity War was an absolutely insane undertaking, with the enormous cast, scale, and overall story culmination it had to accomplish. There are bound to be a mistake or two. During the infamous snap, we cut around to different characters to see which characters will and won't live. Despite it being daytime in Wakanda, the fact that it is also daytime in San Francisco and Hawkeye's farmhouse in Endgame does quite make sense. This incredibly small mistake is one that many likely did not notice, especially since it doesn't really negatively impact the viewing experience. Since we are going after the biggest movies in the world, it only seems right to talk about Avengers Endgame. During the portal scene, with almost every character in the MCU coming together to save the world, we see Captain America holding a surprisingly still intact shield despite it being previously damaged. The filmmakers were likely banking on the fact that the audience would cry or clap too loudly to see this minor mistake, and they weren't wrong. While the two mistakes we mentioned are far from plot breaking, we are now starting to veer in that direction. Much of the plot revolves around the time heist in Avengers Endgame. The film excuses the fact that Tony hadn't figured out time travel because he didn't have the Pym particle. This also gave the writers a way to explain why the Avengers only had one shot, as they only had a finite amount of particles. This makes sense until you realize that Ant-Man repeatedly shrinks during said time heist. He said they needed to be extremely careful using the particles. There is a possibility that they planned for him to shrink and thus save the extra particles. However, this is never said in the film, and based on Scott's reaction when he accidentally uses them, it seems to be somewhat of a mistake.
One test run.
Back in 2011, the internet was in an uproar over a very specific few frames in Thor. In Odin's glorious treasure room, there is half of a moment where we see a fully completed Infinity Gauntlet. The way that the internet reacted to this no doubt had an impact on the future of the MCU. However, this mystery is quickly fixed in the third Thor film. In Thor Ragnarok, Hela seemingly talks to the audience as she pushes the fake gauntlet over, paying off a long-running inside joke. Where this gets murky is during Infinity War, when Thor goes to Nidavellir and sees a mold for a new gauntlet. This is shown as a surprise to Thor. Wouldn't Thor know what this is? Furthermore, how did Odin get that gauntlet if the dwarf Atri had never yet created it? Seeing as Ragnarok was one of the last films to come out before Infinity War, this brought up a couple of in-universe questions that confused some audiences. Since we are talking about the gauntlet, there is another mistake concerning the gauntlet that happens in Avengers Endgame. During the climactic finale, when Thanos is about to snap his fingers for the second time, we see his fingers seemingly clip through his own hand. This was a genuine technical error, as confirmed by the VFX supervisor Matt Aitken when he went on the YouTube channel Corridor Crew. Aitken talks about the surprise of this moment slipping through the cracks. Then, reminding us that artists make these films, and despite how perfect they seem, they also make mistakes. It has since been fixed for the digital and at-home releases of the film. However, if you look online, you can find this very minor but important detail.
I am inevitable.
Since we are talking about time travel in Endgame, there is one enormous mistake that audiences are still attempting to figure out. At the film's end, Captain America goes back in time to return all the Infinity Stones to restore the timeline. Instead of Cap appearing in the time machine, he is much older on a park bench, having lived a full life with Peggy. The implication being that older Steve had been sitting there the whole time and nobody noticed? This breaks to what has already been established when it comes to time travel. As we learn throughout, they're not so much time traveling as they are dimension hopping. The events of Loki show that this Endgame timeline was not the prime timeline. So if they are dimension hopping, it would make it impossible for Steve to be on the bench, as he would need to come back to this dimension, thus going through the portal. Many other people have attempted to justify this moment with in-universe explanations. However, based on the setup we are given in this movie, this really doesn't make sense.
No.
Despite that, this scene and many others toward the end of the film are meant to be emotion driven. Saying goodbye to a character we have watched for 11 years is enough to look past this error because the scene is simply too impactful. Even if it doesn't make sense, we are with the characters. We finally get to see Steve let go of the war and have Sam take the mantle as the new Captain America. In the end, people remember that from this moment, even if it didn't make complete sense how he got there. One of the biggest and most well-known MCU mistakes comes from Spider-Man Homecoming.
Okay, Peter, you got this, you got this.
What the hell are you wearing?
It's my suit.
The film's opening shows Adrian Toomes salvaging the remains of a Chitauri Leviathan, presumably right after Avengers, as the city is still very much destroyed. After he gets pushed out by the DoD, we get a time jump to 8 years later. This breaks the timeline the films had set up to this point. Except for a couple of films, most are set in the same year that they came out. So if Avengers came out in 2012 and Homecoming, which is set directly after Civil War, came out in 2016, that would make Homecoming set in roughly 2016. This was the first time that a mistake on this magnitude happened in an MCU movie. Most mistakes could be passed off as minor plot holes, while this one breaks the space-time continuum. Since this mistake, the creators at Marvel, like producer Kevin Feige and the Russos, have addressed it as being simply wrong. Marvel themselves have even released timeline books and explainers in an attempt to fix the confusion. The real reason for this timeline mess came down to the biggest twist in the film, Adrian Toomes being Liz's father. This twist has little foreshadowing, starting with the Avengers drawing in the film's opening shot. Seeing as Liz was a senior during Homecoming, that would have made her 12 years old during the events of the Avengers. That is a tad too old for a kid to be drawing like that.
When I was a kid, I used to draw cowboys and Indians.
Actually, it's Native American, but...
Which is why they chose to make this convoluted timeline switch up. The film takes a massive turn once the twist is revealed, so it makes sense why they felt it was so important. Was it important enough to break the universe, though? While we have talked about big and small mistakes throughout the MCU, there is also a number of tiny, more fun mistakes, such as Black Widow's knocking out a guard with her hair in Avengers, or when Ant-Man seemingly teleports around the battle at the end of Avengers Endgame.
I don't know if it was baby me or old me.
There are also a few frames of a crew member seen during Doctor Strange when he is exploring the Sanctum Sanctorum, unlike his gray shirt guy counterpart seen in The Mandalorian. This film has chosen to keep this crew member's cameo.
It's strange.
Maybe. Who am I to judge?
Who knows, maybe this was intentional. Could this crew member be the Watcher? This innocent reflection mistake could be this person's big break in the MCU. All jokes aside, it is always important to remember that no matter how big these films are, they are made by people. Mistakes can slip through the cracks even with all the money in the world. These mistakes are excellent reminders of how much care is put into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because the few mistakes that do happen stick out like a sore thumb, while other franchises like Game of Thrones or Star Wars chose to cover up their mistakes after fans spotted them. The MCU doesn't seem all too worried about small errors. At the end of the day, these mistakes are something that fans can actually appreciate in a filmmaking sense. Are there any mistakes that we missed? Head on down to the comments and let us know. We'll see you right back here next time on Screen Rant.